now watching Way Back Wednesday, sponsored by Davenport Auto Park, the ride of your life. And also sponsored by Flores Glass, serving the area since 1977 with residential and commercial work.
Well, welcome, friends, to another episode of Way Back Wednesday. I'm Randy Adcox. So glad you could join us tonight. Last week we had a good time talking about Mr. Wilkinson and W.S. Wilkinson and his beautiful home over on Falls Road. Show of hands, how many thought that when I mentioned we were going to look at it and talk about a house on Falls Road, how many of you thought that we were going to talk about the house with the brick wall all the way around it? If you did, no problem. A lot of folks don't realize that house is not on Falls Road. It actually faces Brazel Street. So anyway, while I was getting ready for last week's show, I happened to think about that house on Brazel Street, and I thought, that'd be a neat house to do a little research into also. So that's what this show is going to primarily be about, the house, the man who built the house, a little history about the house. I learned quite a bit of things I did not know about that house, and particularly about the man who built it. So we'll get to all that in a minute. Before we do, quite often while I'm going through doing research for any given topic on the show, I stumble across other photographs, other articles, other pictures, and so forth that either relate in some obscure way or something I just thought was neat and wanted to share with you, the viewer. And that was the case this week when I was acquiring and looking for pictures. I stumbled across a picture. I had seen a picture of this school before, but I had not seen this particular picture. And as often is the case with these pictures from the telegram, they don't reproduce very well, particularly ones that date back to the turn of the century. But anyway, go ahead, Lee, if you would put up picture number one. And this was taken around 1902. And this is the Old West School. It was completed in 1902. It says this building, located on the present site of the James Craig Brazel School, was Rocky Mount's first public school. And we've talked about this school before. There was an East School, of course, and a West School. The East School was over there where the Rocky Mount Judicial Center, Fanny Gorham School was. This was the West School, of course, as the caption says. It was on the site of the present-day James Craig Brazel School. And I've got pictures of this school, one or two at least, but this is one I had not seen before, and this appeared in the telegram. It was undated as far as when the picture was taken, but of course the school was built in 1902, so we're guessing it was sometime early 1900s. But it's a neat old picture of a neat old school from a bygone era. I just thought it'd be neat to share it with you. And speaking of schools, if you remember during last week's show, we talked about Mr. Wilkinson and that area around his house off of Falls Road, and of course Wilkinson School. I made mention that I went to school there. My mother went to school there, and one of our viewers, sent me a message on Facebook and said, wasn't Miss McDearman the principal over there? And I thought for myself, I honestly do not remember my principal. I was only there for about 2.5 years, I think, all total. And I'm sure it will come to me at some point, but I could not remember. So coincidentally, as I was looking for other pictures for tonight's show, I stumbled across this picture. Lee, if you would put up picture number 2 for us. This is from 1953, and this is actually a picture that was taken at the retirement ceremony for Mrs. Bessie McDearman. And I'll read the caption here for you. It says, on hand at Wilkinson School Monday night for a reception honoring Miss Bessie McDearman for 49 years of service to the Rocky Mount school system were left to right Mrs. Henry Gregory Jr., Ms. McDearman, Frank S. Wilkinson, Mrs. Julian Fenner, and Mrs. W.J. Whitehurst. Miss McDearman, who will retire at the end of the current school year, is shown receiving a silver coffee pot containing a $100 bill. Coffee pot was nice, but a $100 bill stuck in there really made a much nicer gift. So that's why I didn't remember Miss McDearman. She actually graduated about a dozen years before I was over there. So I think I got over somewhere around 63, 64, maybe 65. Anyway, she retired in 1953. So she was certainly there when my mother was there. And Alice, that's why you remember her, because she was there when you were there as well. So, okay. All right. I mentioned that when I was looking for last week's show and pictures and so forth, it dawned on me that the house with the brick wall around it would also be perhaps an interesting topic for a show. So I began doing some research on that a couple days ago, even more yesterday, and finally today. And I compiled quite a bit of information, more so about the man who built the house than the house itself. The house obviously has a lot of history. But if you're not sure which one I'm talking about, Lee put up the next item. I think it's item number 2A there on the list. There you go. The address of this house is 110 Braswell Street. And of course, it's on the corner lot there of Braswell Street and Falls Road. It's a beautiful home. It's currently owned by Rocky Mount City Council member Andre Knight. He purchased a home. I saw two different references to a purchase on this home. I'm not sure which one is accurate. One listing stated that the home was purchased in 1998. Another listing said the home was purchased in 2013. My guess is it was probably purchased in 1998 and perhaps refinanced in 2013, because I think Andre's owned this house more than the 4 or 5 years that would be the case if he had purchased it in 2013. So in any case, this is the home I'm talking about. The house was built in 1950, and it was built by Mr. Henry Gregory. And of course, many of you refer to this home as the Henry Gregory home. I know I did for many, many years, but I didn't know anything about Mr. Gregory himself. And so I thought that'd be an interesting topic, and so I set out to find out what I could find out about Mr. Henry Gregory. Interestingly enough, this man had 3 first names. His full name was Richard Henry Gregory. And, like so many leaders, in civic leaders and city leaders over the course of Rocky Mount's history, and we talked about this last week too, if you remember, these gentlemen, and these women too, they were women that went along this same path. They were certainly community-oriented, civic-minded, and I'm amazed at the amount of time they put into different things around the community, whether it was participate in different various boards or committees, or making themselves available to speak at different functions. There were thousands of listings for Henry Gregory when I did a search for him at the Rocky Mount Telegram, and I just had no idea the man was as spread as thin, for lack of a better term. Now, I'm sure he would not have referred to himself as being spread thin, and that's a trait of gentlemen like this. They don't ever seem to have that mindset that I'm spreading myself too thin. If called upon to be participating in some event or some function, they almost always agreed, and they were just very active in the community, and he was certainly no exception. So without further ado, let's jump in, Lee. I think we're at picture number 3 now, are we? Okay, let's go with picture number 3. This is actually an article that appeared in March of 1920. And I'll read a little bit of it for you, but it talks about local school children in a contest. And it says, Principal Robert F. Mosley of the Edgemont School has reported to the War Loan Organization at Richmond, Virginia, that 21 of his pupils will enter the thrift poster contest arranged for school children in the 5th Federal Reserve District. Names of Rocky Mount children who will submit original designs for thrift posters are as follows: Henry Gregory, Annie Stallings, Ruby Browning, Gertrude Price, Gerald Melvin, Sidney Gardner, Alfred Johnson, Emma Lancaster, William Robbins, Roy Proctor, William Cherry, Chandler Eakes, Perrin Harris, Linwood Elmore, Ben Dove, Matt Jarman, Charles Griffin, Tom Pearsall, Worth Joyner, Joseph Hadlow, and Orion Melvin. It says prizes totaling $100 have been offered for the best posters submitted under the rules of the contest, which have been placed in the hands of local teachers. Additional copies of the oh, Jack, it's a little dark in the bottom right-hand corner. I can't make out what it says. But this was put together by the War Loan Organization, Educational Division. Again, 1920. And this was the first listing I found Henry Gregory and any kind of participation of anything. I'm sure they were involved with other things too. He was a school kid at this age. But in any case, that was in 1920, first time I saw his name in any kind of publication. Mr. Gregory had many friends over the course of his life, and no closer friend than none other than Kay Kaiser, the big band leader. And I was a little surprised to find out just what type of friendship they had, how close it was, and how enduring, how long it lasted. If you would, Lee, put up picture number 4. This picture was taken in 1923, and it's a picture of Henry Gregory there on the left and Kay Kaiser on the right. This was taken in 1923, and the caption reads, Henry Gregory left and Kay Kaiser were co-editors of the Rocky Mount High School yearbook, The High Knocker, in 1923. And this photo, they take an oath never to get themselves in such a project again. So a little bit of humor there from both of these guys. But this was a friendship that would literally endure a lifetime. From 1923, where they were co-editors of the Rocky Mount High School yearbook, all the way through their adult lives. These gentlemen stayed in touch. They were really good friends. Kay Kaiser came to Rocky Mount several times over the years, and some of those trips, quite a few in fact, were to spend time with his old friend Henry Gregory. So I thought it was neat that Henry Gregory was such good friends with Kay Kaiser, and they maintained that friendship. Even though Kay Kaiser was a world-renowned entertainer, traveled abroad, obviously, was in movies, and his band toured across the country and indeed around the world, and yet they stayed in touch. They stayed close friends and continued to be in touch literally until Kay Kaiser passed away in 1985. Okay, Lee, so let's then, if we could, go to, that was picture number 4. This is the house right beside the big brick as we just showed you. And this is the house that Henry Gregory and his wife, Virginia, were living in when they decided to build the home literally right next door on a roughly 1.2 acre lot. So in the 1934 city directory, this residence here, it's listed as 122 Braswell Street. This was the residence of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Gregory. And so they were here from 34 to roughly 1949 or so, and construction began on the big house, if you will, right next door. And that house was completed sometime around 1950, and they of course moved into that house and were there for many years after that. So okay, so we've established where the house where they lived before they built the big house, and then of course they moved into the big house when it was finished. So what I found over the course of Mr. Gregory's lifetime, as I said earlier, he was heavily involved in all kinds of community events, certainly in business. He had his hands in at least a dozen different businesses, either as an owner or a co-owner or a partner or an investor or something to do on the board of directors. And we'll touch base on some of those throughout the show tonight. But the very first thing that I saw that he was actually involved in, and this was in 1937, he's still a very young man. Still in his early 30s. I think he was born somewhere around 1904, 1905. So still in his early youth, I won't say youth, he was a grown man obviously by this time, but already laying the groundwork for what was going to be a very active and civic-minded leader in this city. So Lee, if you would, put up item number 6. And this was an ad that appeared. It was actually a full-page ad. And I know you can't see it because there was just so much. I wanted to try to get it all on the screen, and when I did, I had to shrink it down to size. But in 1937, this article, or this ad, I should say, appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram, and you see the big headline on top says, "Help Rocky Mount Care for Her Own Community Chest Campaign, October 12th through the 14th. Rocky Mount has a heart big enough for all 5 campaigns in one." And so when I zoomed in on this and read through these list of people, it was literally like a who's who of some of Rocky Mount's most prominent, well-to-do, influential people that ever lived in this city. And of course, there were several committees and subcommittees that all participated in putting this community chest together. And it was all about raising money for needy people, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Salvation Army. It was literally a community-wide effort of neighbors helping neighbors, friends helping friends, and strangers helping strangers. But of course, amongst all the other names that I found on this list was there were several committees, as I said. In fact, it looks like there were about 11 or 12 different committees that were put together of local businessmen to help pull this thing together and make it into a success. And committee number 3, the captain of that committee was none other than Henry Gregory Jr. And I'll just read some of these names: Tom Pearsall, T.E. Jolly, W.S. Johnson, F.E. Winslow, R.L. Yelverton, Sam Gold, Sam Toller, R.E. Fleming. I mean, there was just, like I said, there's probably 30 or 40 people that were involved on this list here that were in some way either a chairman or a committee member or someone involved in helping this thing move forward. And that is a theme that I found throughout the life of Mr. Henry Gregory, is that he was very civic minded, and not only did he care about his business and business interests, but he definitely cared about people. And you know, that's one of the things that I've seen and read about so often with these former, and I'm not saying we don't have any now, that's not the point, but in these business leaders from bygone eras, it just seemed to be a general thing with these individuals that they cared about people on a level that you rarely see anymore. And they went out of their way to help those less fortunate and to make sure that everybody got a fair shake. And it's ironic because all we hear about is how unfair life is for some people sometimes, and that's certainly, you know, indisputable. But there's been an effort in this city going back many, many decades by some very prominent, very well-meaning people to fix that and to make things better for everyone. And Mr. Gregg was certainly one of those people. I tell you what, Lee, I see we're right at the first commercial break. Let's go ahead and take that break now. And when we come back, we're going to jump back in. I've got some more articles to show you, some more pictures to show you. So don't go anywhere. We'll take your calls too. 407-1111 is a number. But right now, we'll take our first commercial break. When we come right back, we'll talk about Mr. Henry Gregory some more and show you some more pictures. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
When faced with special care needs for elderly or disabled loved ones, families want compassionate, comforting care. That's Tender Touch Home Care Services' goal, providing the level of care we would expect for our own. With over 10 years of home care excellence, Tender Touch provides an array of services that keeps your loved one at home. From personal care, light housekeeping, errands, and meal preparation, to our private duty care program, which combines all of our home care offerings in one package.
Tender Touch Home Care Services, where your needs are our concern.
And we're back. Folks, if you're just tuning in, you're watching Wayback Wednesday. We're talking about Mr. Henry Gregory tonight in his house over on Brazel Street, around the corner there, Brazel and Falls Road. You know, I mentioned that Mr. Gregory, like so many other leaders of his day, were very community-oriented, very conscientious about those less fortunate. And in addition to being a superb business leader, and I mean, in his business record, it speaks for itself. We'll get into some of the numbers here a little bit later on in the show. But he was certainly mindful of people in this city who needed some help. But at the same time, he was very practical, very pragmatic about how that help should be administered. No better example of that than item number 7, if you would. In December 1937, he spoke at the local CIVITANS club. And he spoke specifically about the FHA had an amendment pending in Congress that was being pushed by those who were, I think, had good intentions. I think their thought was we need to make it easier for people to get into a home. And this same theme has come up several times over the years, and it's caused several housing crashes too over the years. But here's what Mr. Henry Gregory had to say about it. It says, Gregory speaks before CIVITANS. R. Henry Gregory Jr., well-known local businessman, addressed the Civitan Club last night on the FHA, vigorously condemning an amendment to the FHA bill pending in Congress, which would raise the limit of loans from 80 to 90% of the value of the home. The policies of the FHA will result in a badly founded building loan, he declared, the backwash of which will ruin real estate value for years into the future. He characterized as illogical President Roosevelt's housing program, which he interpreted as attempting to lower prices of building materials by sponsoring a boom. The Civitan Club will have a ladies' night program December 16 at 8 o'clock in the Winston's Cafeteria, Committee Chairman Ray Bandy announced. District Governor Forrest G. Mills and Mrs. Mills of Winston-Salem are expected to attend the meeting. So the gist of this was the FHA been around for many, many years, made thousands, millions of home loans over the years, and they wanted to raise the limit of building loans from 80% of the value of the home to 90% of the value of the home. And Mr. Gregory said, that's a bad idea. These loans are not going to be sound financially. They're not going to have a good basis for underwriting these loans. And it was just, he said, bad idea. And so I did not find anywhere else where that amendment that the FHA was pushing in 1937 went through. But certainly he got involved and got out here and, let his thoughts be known. And he was well respected. His opinion was carefully considered by everyone in the business. And so when he spoke, people listened. That's the bottom line. Okay, that was number 7. Let's go to number 8, Lee, if we could. And I've included this only because if you remember a couple of weeks, and I know you can't read on your screen, so bear with me just a minute. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a man named Frank Lowe. He worked for Standard Electric. He eventually came to own Lowe's Appliance Service down on Main Street. Very successful businessman in his own right. And so when I was looking for information on Mr. Henry Gregory, lo and behold, I came across a wedding announcement. And this was a pretty interesting wedding announcement, and I'm not going to try, as you see, it's very long. I'm not going to try to read most of it, in fact. I'm not going to read. But I want to hit a few highlights from this wedding announcement that appeared in May of 1937. And the bride is Mrs. Mary Corrine Gregory, and it says she was wed today to Frank Green Lowe Jr. in a private ceremony which is characterized by dignity and simplicity. The wedding vows were spoken at 10 o'clock at the Church of the Good Shepherd, and the Reverend Francis Crahill officiated, using the ring ritual of the church. There were no wedding attendants other than Mr. R. Henry Gregory Jr., brother of the bride, who entered the church with her and gave her in marriage, and Mr. E.D. Gordon, who was the best man for Mr. Lowe. So it goes on to state later on, it says, Miss Gregory entered the church with her brother, Mr. R. Henry Gregory, by whom she was given in marriage, and she was joined at the chancel by Mr. Lowe and Mr. Gordon, who had entered from the choir room to await the coming of the bride. Then it goes on to say, immediately following the service, Mr. and Ms. Lowe left for an overland trip to an unannounced destination, after which they will make their home at the home of Miss Kate Arrington at 707 Falls Road. Lastly, it talks a little bit about Mr. Lowe. So Mr. Lowe is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Frank Lowe Green, and he too numbers an unusually wide circle of friends here and in the state. He graduated from Rocky Mount Senior High School and went into business, having already established himself among the prominent younger businessmen of the city. He holds a responsible position with the Standard Electric Company here. So Frank Lowe of Standard Electric, and then later Lowe's Appliance, married Henry Gregory's sister. I never knew there was a family connection there. But when I read this wedding announcement, I couldn't help but, these are two fairly prominent people, and the only people at the wedding besides the bride and the groom was the brother of the bride and then this Mr. Gordon, who was the best man from Mr. Lowe. Not sure any details. This is all I found about this, and I really didn't look any further. But it was just unusual, I thought, for two people of this financial stature to have such a low-key wedding. And I'll let you read into that what you want to. I'm not going to elaborate any more on that. I just thought it was interesting. Mr. Lowe there married Henry Gregory's sister. Okay, Lee. So let's go ahead then, if we could, to item number 9. I mentioned earlier about the friendship between Mr. Henry Gregory and his good pal, Kay Kaiser. This is a terrible picture, I know, but this was taken in November 1939. And I read the caption here. It says, Kay Kaiser had a full day yesterday, even if the official Kay Kaiser day was over. In the afternoon, he addressed the student body of Rocky Mount High School. He led a few cheers and made a plea for the high school annual. Kaiser was the first high school cheerleader and also the first editor of the annual. Last night, Kaiser attended the Rocky Mount Wilson football game in Wilson. Kaiser is shown in the middle of the picture with Henry Gregory on his left. David Butler, director of the picture, is directly behind Gregory, and Jenny Sims smiles over Kaiser's right shoulder. Burr, Blair, and Ms. Butler are on Kaiser's right. Kaiser was surrounded by a large crowd during the time he stayed at the game. And you know, in addition to being the co-editor of the High Knocker at Rocky Mount Senior High School, it says here he was also a cheerleader at Rocky Mount Senior High School. And when he went to college at UNC, he was a cheerleader there as well. So a little history there on Kay Kaiser and his friendship as it worked out with Henry Gregory there. So neat couple of guys there for sure. Okay, Lee, let's go ahead then to item number 10. This appeared in 1941, and it's just another example of Mr. Gregory's involvement in so many different business ventures. And again, this is a long article, but I just want to highlight a little bit of it. You see the headline says, many local men to leave for a B&L convention. The B&L stood for Business and Loan. Building and Loan. And it says 10 company officials representing the 4 building and loan companies here are planning to take the trip. They are R.D. Wimberly, S.E. Ballantyne, and R.H. Gregory Jr. of the First Federal Savings and Loan Association. J.C. Brazel, George S. Edwards, and R.L. Sides of Citizens Building and Loan Company. I.J. Dowdy, W.M. Spears, C.C. Ward of Builders Federal Savings and Loan Association, and H.H. Strandberg of New Home Building and Loan Association. That, by the way, is the same H.H. Strandberg that started Standard Insurance and Realty, or at least I think he bought it after it had been in operation for a little while. But these same group of gentlemen, over a course of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases, were all just very instrumental taking these trips, gaining knowledge, gaining experience, making contacts in many cases. Networking, I think, is a term that's quite often used today, where you go out and you meet people and you find people that can help you achieve a goal or better things around you. And so Henry Gregory was certainly in that group, and he certainly knew how to work a crowd and get things done. Fast forward now a little bit to February of 1942. Lee, if you would put up item number 11 on the screen there, and here we go. And keep in mind now, February 1942, we're involved in World War II. And all over the country, and Rocky Mount was no different, the war effort was underway. There was rationing and conservation efforts to help the war effort. And there was a defense agency, if you will, here locally. And I read the caption here. It says, to replace Julian B. Fenner, former defense coordinator who has left Rocky Mount for a post in the Naval Intelligence, Millard F. Jones, Defense Council Chairman, appointed Henry Gregory Jr. for the job. Serving with Gregory as assistant coordinators will be B.S. Young and E.B. Brown. Shown above are seated Gregory, so that's Henry Gregory seated there, standing left to right, Mr. Jones, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Young. Gregory stated that the defense program will be maintained along the same lines as those developed by Fenner. So, each little community, each city had a defense organization, if you will, where they would, do things like drives to, have people donate everything from tires to iron to metals and different things for the war effort. And so here locally, Henry Gregory was appointed to head up the defense league here locally in Rocky Mount. Okay, that was in February 42. And there was an article that accompanied this picture. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. It says, the war has already brought about the first change in Rocky Mount Civilian Defense Office. Julian B. Fenner, who acted as defense coordinator from the time of the office's institution, has left Rocky Mount. He was officially replaced today by Henry Gregory Jr. And it goes on to say, Gregory, about to take over the duties of defense coordinator, will carry on as it did under Fenner. In the event the duties of defense coordinator and chairman of the rationing board, another of Gregory's jobs, should become too great, Mr. Young and Mr. Brown have been appointed to assist him. So again, this was very important work these guys were doing, obviously, for the war effort. And this same thing was duplicated all over the country by small towns and cities and communities. And these gentlemen were very much involved in it here locally. Okay, let's fast forward to June 1945. Item number 13, if you would, Lee. And this is a picture that, did we skip one? Oh, that's what I just read, Lee. You can go ahead past that one. And the next item up should be item number, there you go. This is a picture that says Senator Claude Pepper, Florida Democrat, is shown here at the left at the annual dinner meeting of the Chamber of Commerce just before he spoke to the group. The meeting was held Saturday at the Rick's Hotel. Henry Gregory, in the center there, president of the Chamber of Commerce, presided over the session. E.F. Austin, secretary of the Chamber of Commerce, is shown at the right. So here we are, 45, the war is winding down now. Still a lot going on in Rocky Mount, obviously. And Henry Gregory is ever more involved in these different things around Rocky Mount organizations and committees. He's on several boards of different institutions, savings and loans, banks, and so forth. It's just amazing to me how someone could be involved in so many different things and have any personal life whatsoever. But that's the type of man he was, and it's shown throughout his life. He was just very much involved in anything that was requested of him. Okay, fast forward again, January 1949, and Lee, that would be item number 14 on your list there. First Federal Savings and Loan holds annual meeting here. It says officers and directors of the First Federal Savings and Loan Association were re-elected yesterday at the meeting of the shareholders. Henry Gregory Jr. was re-elected president, Robert D. Wimberly vice president, Alfred Stansel treasurer, Helen Drummond secretary, A.P. Thorpe was named as chairman of the board. And it goes on to talk about First Federal had entered its 47th year in as fine a financial institution as any institution of its kind could enjoy. I'm not exactly sure when First Federal came into existence, but by 1949 it was already well established. Henry Gregory was at the helm, and by all accounts, it was a successful operation and ran for many years very successfully too. Okay, so I mentioned that Mr. Gregory was involved in several different organizations. Here was just re-elected as president of the First Federal Savings. He was Chamber of Commerce president. He was involved with the local defense league here. And he was also on the board of directors of Planters Bank. Item number 20, if you would, Lee. This is November 1949. This is the same year that he was re-elected the president of First Federal Savings. He appears on a list of Planters National Bank Board of Directors. And again, this isn't something that required him to be involved every day or even every week, I'm sure. These board members probably met once a month. Sometimes probably might skip a month or two. But the point is that men like Henry Gregory and Josh Horn and W.S. Wilkinson, and even before these guys, the Robert H. Ricks, and these gentlemen were always, it seemed to be, involved in several different things simultaneously. And throughout their lives, that's the way they just operated. It was like they had this drive that most people don't have. If you're like me, it's all you can do to get up and go to work and pull your 8 hours and go home and plop in front of your chair and be glad the day's over with. But these guys seem to always be willing and able to find time to be members of different boards and different organizations. And it's just a testament to the character of these men. And it's amazing to me to look at what they were able to accomplish over a lifetime. So, okay, Lee. Item number 16, just for a bit of a chuckle here. This little blurb here appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram, December 1949. And you see the headline, Bitten by Squirrel. And it says, the bandaged thumb which Henry Gregory Jr. is carrying around did not come from his own choosing. He was the object of an attack yesterday on his own front yard. It happened when Gregory Insurance, a real estate man, noticed a squirrel visitor on his lawn. He sent his son into the house to get some pecans. In the meantime, he spoke to the squirrel. It was actually a neighbor's pet, and the animal readily came to him. A few more kind words, and the squirrel leaped upon Henry's shoulder. Suddenly, the squirrel, which still hadn't had anything to eat, had another idea, and it quickly raced down the Gregory arm and fastened its teeth into Gregory's thumb. Gregory, with blood spouting, rushed off to the hospital for treatment. The squirrel is still awaiting around for the pecans, excuse me. So, just goes to show, a wild animal is a wild animal. You can tame them, you can make them a little easier to get along with, but they're still wild. When I read this, I couldn't help but think about Mr. Z.B. Bullock over here in Inglewood. His son, Wayne, lived in the old home place there for many, many years after Mr. Z.B. passed away. And I used to go as a child to go over there, and Wayne had tamed all the squirrels around the neighborhood over there to eat peanuts out of his hand. And that used to amaze me. He would sit on the back steps of his house with a handful of peanuts, and he would motion with the peanut for the squirrel to come, and they would come right up to him and take the peanut out of his hand and run off and eat it, and then come back and get another one. And like I said, it was a neat thought that was conjured up by reading this story about Mr. Henry Gregory getting bit on the finger by a squirrel when he's trying to feed him, had planned to feed him a pecan, never gotten around to feed him. Okay, so let's fast forward again, Lee. Picture number 17 is an article that appeared in the Telegram in 1950, February 1950. And again, I realize you can't read that on your screen, so I'm just going to read a little bit of it to you. But it talks about, it says, Henry Gregory Jr. named head of community council. Henry Gregory Jr. was unanimously elected president of the community council last night. The new president, third for the young organization, succeeds Frank S. Sproul. Speaking of names you recognize. Other officers on the state named at the meeting held at the Brazel Library are Vice Presidents Mrs. M.L. Warner and Montera Davis, Treasurer C.W. Parker, and Executive Secretary Erie Austin. And it goes on to talk about a little bit about the efforts of the community council. They were fighting delinquency in schools, trying to keep kids in school. They were had a campaign to cut down on vandalism and destruction of private property. There was even an effort that was mentioned here in this article. So a large part of the work of the health division of the community council concerned itself with facilities to Negroes in hospitals here. It has worked all year on the problem, has presented resolutions to both Rocky Mount Sanitarium and Parkview Hospital asking that a wing or wings, especially for Negro patients, nurses, and physicians, be constructed. It's reported that the sanatorium, being a private-owned institution, did not feel it could participate. The board of directors of Parkview Hospital is considering the application. So, you know, this is an organization that, by its own admission, 1950, only been around for 3 years. But Henry Gregory headed it up in 1950, and one of the many goals of this organization was, again, to better Rocky Mount, to make things better here for all people, regardless of your social status, of your financial status, and of course, regardless of your race or creed. And I saw example after example of this same type of effort to make Rocky Mount a better place by Mr. Gregory, and it was just really neat to see that kind of focus from a businessman. All right, Lee, I'll tell you what, let's take a break again. When we come back, we're going to show you some more pictures, talk a little bit more about Mr. Henry Gregory and his efforts around Rocky Mount and some of the things he was involved with. So don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with more Way Back Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service, we offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family, and we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
When faced with special care needs for elderly or disabled loved ones, families want compassionate, comforting care. That's Tender Touch Home Care Services' goal, providing the level of care we would expect for our own. With over 10 years of home care excellence, Tender Touch provides an array of services that keeps your loved one at home. From personal care, light housekeeping, errands, and meal preparation, to our private duty care program, which combines all of our home care offerings in one package.
Tender Touch Home Care Services, where your needs are our concern.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, you're watching Way Back Wednesday. I'm Randy Adcox. We're talking tonight about Mr. Henry Gregory, prominent Rocky Mount businessman back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, even into the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He had his fingers in everything. I mean, he was on various boards and committees and prominent business leader, owned several businesses himself. Just a man about town, very civic-minded, very aware of his community, and a devoted Catholic, and very much involved in trying to make Rocky Mount a better city for everyone here. Let's jump back into it, Lee. Item number 18, I mentioned about the friendship between Kay Kaiser and Henry Gregory. It lasted literally until Kay Kaiser died. He died before Mr. Gregory died. But in 1953, there was a grand opening of the first federal building, and the caption here reads, Rocky Mount's own Kay Kaiser, center with the microphone, was one of the more than 2,000 visitors who attended the formal opening ceremonies of the new First Federal Building Thursday night. Henry Gregory Jr. left, president of First Federal and an old friend of Kaiser's, looks on while the former stage and screen star takes over the microphone from Ray Wilkinson, program director for local radio station, which is broadcast and account at opening ceremonies. Very young Ray Wilkinson there. Every time I hear the name Ray Wilkinson, I think about his farm reports when I was a kid. Every day at lunchtime, he would announce the price of livestock on the radio, the cows and hogs, and I mean, when I think of Ray Wilkinson, that's my first thought, was a farm report. But anyway, Kay Kaiser and Henry Gregory were really good friends. And I saw at least 3 or 4 different instances where Kay Kaiser came back to visit his old friend and participate in some kind of event with his old friend there, Henry Gregory. Okay, fast forward again, 1957, February, the 55th birthday celebration of First Federal Savings and Loan Association. And you see there, those are the gentlemen and ladies that were part of that. And again, I'm just going to read some of these names real quick. Upper left-hand corner, that is Henry Gregory Jr. To his right, R.D. Wimberly, A.P. Thorpe, Helen Drummond, Nina Jean Fussell, Julian B. Finner, R.A. King. Second row is Herman Merrill and D.J. Rose Jr. Alfred Stansel, Dr. Adam Thorpe, John Van Jr., Ann Joyner, Doris Jean Newsom. These are just people whose names you hear over and over and over again throughout Rocky Mount's history, and they all made a significant contribution to Rocky Mount, and certainly no more contribution than Henry Gregory himself. All right, Lee, that was number 19. Item number 20, if you would, and this was something that I did not know. I was completely unaware of any affiliation between Henry Gregory and Thompson Pharmacy. I'm going to read you this, capture this picture first, and there's a neat article that accompanied this picture in the Rocky Mount Telegram in January of 1958. The caption reads, "New Thompson Pharmacy. Pictured here is an interior view of the expanded Thompson Pharmacy on Falls Road. Formal opening of the handsome new drug emporium will be celebrated on Saturday." So it's not a great picture, I realize, kind of dark, but it's an inside shot inside Thompson Pharmacy down on Falls Road across from the old Parkview Hospital. Okay, here's the article that appeared with that picture. It says, after complete renovation, Thompson Pharmacy, located at 365 Falls Road, will celebrate its grand opening Saturday from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. The store, remodeled and expanded to meet growing business needs, is owned by Mr. Pierce, Robert D. Wimberly, and Henry Gregory Jr. And it goes on to talk about, what their plans are for the building and for the business. But I never knew that Henry Gregory was in any way associated with Thompson Pharmacy down there. It says the drugstore was originally owned and operated by George Thompson. Buddy Pierce began work there in September of 1935 as a soda jerk, and he and Wimberly and Gregory bought it in 1941, continuing the name of Thompson Pharmacy. So anyway, that was 1958 that they remodeled it, and it was at least partially owned by Henry Gregory and Mr. Wimberly there and Mr. Pierce. Okay, Lee, so item number 21. This is another one of these couple little blips I just found interesting in the Rocky Mount City Directory. You heard me say before, there's just a wealth of information in these city directories, in addition to the name and the address of the individuals and their business address and so forth. Quite often they'll list, affiliations, business affiliations, and so forth. So in the 1960 city directory, which would be item number 21, Lee, on your list in there, this was the listing for Henry Gregory and his wife Virginia. This listing says he was the president of the First Federal Savings and Loan. He was the vice president of Thorpe and Rick's Tobacco. There you go. The residence is home residence 110 Brazel Street, and it lists his phone number there. And then you see, of course, below it says Henry and his wife Virginia, vice president Thorpe Ricks, and again the address is 110 Brazel Street. So that was 1960. So now, Lee, go ahead and put up the very next one. This was 1963. I just wanted to see what was different from 1960 to 1963 as it was listed in the Rocky Mount City Directory. So this next listing, and you see it on your screen, it says Henry Gregory, wife was Virginia, of course, Home Building and Improvement Company, Huck's Grocery, Thompson Pharmacy, Wimberly and Gregory, President First Federal Savings and Loan Association, Vice President Thorpe and Rick's Tobacco. I mean, the man just had they had to keep adding on to the city director to have room for all his accomplishments and accolades and credits. But and it didn't stop. That was in 1963. Like I said, the man went on to be in business for another 30 years or more after that, in fact. Or close to it, I should say. Not quite 30 years, but almost. So by 1963, not only had Henry Gregory himself become very successful, obviously, in business, it seemed like everything he touched was also very successful. And First Federal Savings and Loan was just having a banner year in 1963. So Lee, put up, if you would, item number 23. And this was in the Telegram April of 1963. And it says, Henry Gregory reports assets of $17 million. Henry Gregory, president of First Federal Savings and Loan, has issued a special invitation to all of the association's customers and friends to visit its new modern quarters at the formal opening from 7 to 10 Tuesday. Gregory noted at the time, First Federal occupied its former quarters in 1953 and its assets then were approximately $5 million. Since that time, assets have more than tripled and now total in excess of $17 million. When plans were made in 1951 to build the first federal building, finally completed in 1953, we certainly felt we were building adequate quarters to take care of any future expansion. However, steady growth over the last 10 years made it imperative that the building be expanded in additional space. And I cut it off there. It was a big, long article. I wanted to cut it off, but I didn't have to read the whole thing. But again, not only was he himself successful, his business and his partnerships were all very successful too. And that theme just carried on year after year after year. Item number 24, Lee, if we would. You know, that home, 110 Brazel Street, I have no doubt probably there are some beautiful color pictures of that home. I suspect the Our State magazine has probably got a photo spread of it somewhere. But this appeared in December 1964, and it says one of the finest examples of colonial Georgian architecture in this area is the handsome and spacious home of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Gregory, which will be open next Sunday as the Christmas House of the Garden Club. In setting of magnolia trees and formal gardens, the home is of handmade Mankin brick in soft mellow tones that give it the aged look of many early colonial homes in Virginia. So this house was actually put on a tour of homes in 1964 for Christmas, and you could at that time go into it, and it was of course all decorated. Kind of reminds me of what they do now with the Biltmore Estate in Nashville up there. I'm sure it was gorgeous. Never had a chance to go inside this home. I'd love to go inside and see it. Item number 25, Lee, if you would, just another picture of the decoration, and it just shows just one window looking out the back of the home there, it says. But I'm sure this home was absolutely elegant and absolutely beautifully decorated for Christmas in 1964. Okay, fast forward if we could, May 1972, and Wimberly and Gregory, you know, knew we had to get there. We talked about Mr. Henry Gregory, and talked about Mr. Wimberly, so you knew we had to get to Wimberly and Gregory. In 1972, Wimberly and Gregory actually became a corporation. They had actually been around since 1925, so it wasn't a new business, but they formally incorporated it in 1972. So Lee, if you would, put up item number 26 on your list there. And this is just an article that appeared in the photograph in the Rocky Mount Telegram from May the 29th, 1972, and the caption reads, Incorporated, Wimberly and Gregory Company is now incorporated. Former partners Robert D. Wimberly, seated, chairman of the board of directors, adds his signature to incorporation papers beside that of Henry Gregory to the left, senior vice president, longtime associate Alfred Stansel to the right, is president and assistant secretary under the corporate structure. So from 1925, started out as a partnership. In 1972, they incorporated the business, and obviously very successful for many, many years in the Rocky Mountain. Okay, there was a nice article that accompanied that picture, and Lee, I think it's your item number 27. And so just a little bit of history here about the company. It says Wimberly Gregory, Rocky Mount, founded in 1925 as Wimberly and Whitehead. 3 years after the company was formed by partners Robert Wimberly and William Whitehead, Mr. Whitehead died. A short time later, Henry Gregory, an associate, became an active partner. Consequently, the firm's name evolved to reflect a new partnership. So again, started in 1925. Stansel had been with the company since 1937, but Wimberly Gregory had a long and storied history in Rocky Mount. Okay, Lee, if we could, item number 28. You know, I mentioned Mr. Gregory was very much involved in trying to better Rocky Mount and help all people, regardless of your social structure or your race or anything else. And this article appeared in 1977. The Lincoln Park restaurant was open. I think we got a call. Let's get this call. Hello, caller. You on the air?
All right. You've been talking pretty much most of the time about Henry Gregory, and you mentioned Henry Gregory's wife, Virginia.
Right.
The times, but I don't think I've heard it get brought out that his wife, Virginia, she was Virginia Thorpe before she married Henry Gregory. She was a sister to Alex Proudfit Thornton Jr. That's the connection between Henry Gregory and the Thornton Ricks Tobacco Company people.
Gotcha. I had not seen that, so thank you for the information.
All right.
All right, buddy. Have a good night. Okay. So in 1977, the Lincoln Park restaurant, and we had a little discussion about this on a prior show a few weeks back, and this was one of the premier black-owned businesses in the Rocky Mountain area. And it says participating in the opening event were left to right Henry Gregory, and then Ms. Irene Mercer, Alan Mercer, Clarence Wiggins, and the Reverend P.N. Blackstone. So Henry Gregory went out of his way to help businesses get off the ground, was instrumental in promoting them and being a part of them. For his activity, he was awarded Distinguished Citizen twice in Rocky Mount. Lee, item number 29, 1977. The Rocky Mount Chamber of Commerce named Henry Gregory Rocky Mount's Distinguished Citizen for the year. And you see there the people that presented the award: Theo Pitt, George Moore, the governor came, Governor James Hunt, and this was the first award that he received. In 1985, Lee, item number 30, we're trying to wind up, folks, almost out of time here. Good times, it says. Kay Kaiser came back into the life here of Mr. Henry Gregory. Kay Kaiser left tells those attending Distinguished Citizens Award banquet of the good times he and Henry Gregory shared over the years. Gregory in the center there and his wife Virginia obviously enjoyed Kaiser's stories. This appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram in February of 1985. Sadly, and a few short months later, July of 85, Kay Kaiser would pass away. So this was probably one of the last public appearances that Kay Kaiser made in his life, was to come see his old friend be awarded the Rocky Mount Distinguished Citizens Award in 1985. Picture number 31 is just a listing of, it says Pioneer Savings Bank acquires Wimberly, Gregory and Company. This appeared July 1988. So after an illustrious career, much success in the business, Wimberly Gregory was acquired by Pioneer Savings Bank. And then in February of 1995, Henry Gregory celebrated his 90th birthday. And it says he is able to come to the office each day and has daily walks at the mall. So at 90 years old, Henry Gregory was still going to the office and showing up. Sadly, August 23rd, 1995, Henry Gregory passed away at the age of 90. I think I saw somewhere he was 90. Well, he was 90 because he was in 90. February had his 90th birthday celebration, and in August he passed away. Sadly, the obituary listed just dozens of accomplishments and accolades. It was just really a significant read. And the very last thing that I want to share with you tonight as we go off the air. Henry Gregory was just a pioneer in so many ways, but he was also very instrumental in leading Rocky Mount. He was just very much a community, civic-minded individual, and his contributions to the city of Rocky Mount, and indeed to Eastern North Carolina, cannot be understated. Folks, that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining in and being with us. I appreciate those that called in. Have yourselves a great week, folks. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another, and we'll see you next week. Oh, no, we won't. I almost forgot. I will not be here next week. I'm going out of town, pick up my daughter. She's flying in from Ohio. So next week we're going to do a rerun. So I'll see you week after next. Have a great one, folks, and we'll see you. Take care. Good night.